Hey guys, welcome back. I hope you're having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is an entitled People story. I've lived in my neighborhood for over 15 years now, and it's always been a pretty quiet and friendly place. Everyone knows each other, and we occasionally have little get-togethers or parties, nothing too crazy. Well, about 6 months ago, this new guy moved in down the street. From day one, he rubbed me the wrong way. He just had an attitude like he was better than everyone else. The first time I met him when he was moving in, I tried to politely introduce myself and welcome him to the neighborhood. He just rolled his eyes and went, "Yeah, yeah," before going back to barking orders at the movers. Real friendly guy. I tried to give him the benefit of the doubt, though. Maybe he was just having a bad day. So the next time I saw him outside, I went over again and tried to welcome him and see if we could get off on a better foot. Nope. He was just as rude and dismissive as the first time. Wouldn't even tell me his name. At that point, I figured if he wanted to be a jerk, then forget him. I wasn't going to waste my time. A few other neighbors tried to welcome him too, but never got anywhere either. He made zero effort to get to know anyone or join the community. All we knew was that his last name was Miller, so that became his nickname. Miller. Anyway, a couple weekends ago, I decided to throw one of our little neighborhood parties. Just a casual barbecue and some drinks in my backyard. I walked around and personally invited all the neighbors I was friendly with, partly just to be polite, but also so no one felt left out. As I was finishing up the invites, I realized I hadn't even thought about Miller. I mean, why would I invite him? He'd never introduced himself or acted neighborly once. I figured maybe this would be a chance for him to realize he was excluded because of his own behavior, and if he had a problem with it, too bad. The day of the party comes and everything is going great. Good food, good music, everyone chatting and hanging out. Then who comes marching over the fence from Miller's yard? Yep, Miller himself. He lets himself right in without even acknowledging me and grabs a burger off the grill. I walk up to him, trying to keep cool. Can I help you?" I ask him. He looks at me like I'm an idiot. "Yeah, you can get me a beer." Now I'm really annoyed. "Sorry, but this is a private party. I didn't invite you." He laughs right in my face. "Are you kidding me? I live right there." He points back towards his house. "If you're having a party here, I'm part of it." I take a breath, staying firm. "No, you're not. You've never once introduced yourself or made any effort to get to know me or anyone else here, so I'm asking you to please leave." His smug expression quickly turns angry. He steps towards me, trying to use his height to intimidate me. "Listen here, I go wherever I want in this neighborhood. I don't need your permission." By now the confrontation has drawn the attention of the other guests. A couple neighbors step up behind me in support. Miller sees he's outnumbered, but instead of leaving, he whips out his cell phone. "Fine, I see how it is. I'm calling the cops." He dials cop right in front of me. "Yes, hello? I need police here immediately. I'm being unlawfully forced off of private property against my will." I yell over to the operator on the phone. "That's not true. This is my property and party, and he wasn't invited." Miller turns away from me, lowering his voice. "Don't listen to her. She's crazy." At this point, I've had it. I grab the phone out of his hand and address the operator directly. "I'm the homeowner, and I can confirm I did not invite this man to my party or property. Please send an officer to escort him off the premises as he is now trespassing." Miller is fuming now. His face is actually turning red. But with all the witnesses around, he knows better than to try anything physical. Within a few minutes, a patrol car pulls up. The officer gets out and I calmly explain the situation. How Miller has never introduced himself to me or anyone. How he let himself into my private party uninvited. And how he then tried to call the cops on me under false claims. The officer takes statements from a couple other guests to corroborate my story. He then turns to Miller. "Is all this true, sir?" Miller scowls. "I don't have to explain myself to you. This is discrimination and I'm going to sue." The officer remains unfazed. "Be that as it may, if the homeowner has not invited you onto her property, I must ask you to vacate. Otherwise, you would be guilty of trespassing." Realizing he's not going to win this one, Miller throws his hands up. "Fine. I don't need this. I thought this was a classy neighborhood, but apparently not." He storms off back to his house, yelling insults as he goes. What a gem, right? The officer apologizes to me for the disturbance and says Miller has no legal grounds for a discrimination suit. He advises me to call back immediately if Miller returns or causes any other issues. After that, the party carries on without a hitch. Everyone agrees Miller is a piece of work. I just hope he finally learned his lesson that he can't force his way into our community without any effort. But something tells me this won't be the last I hear from him. The next one is a pro-revenge story. When my parents got divorced after 25 years of marriage, my mom was devastated. My dad had been having an affair with his secretary and decided he wanted to trade my mom in for a younger model. Even though the divorce was finalized quickly, my mom struggled to move on. She had dedicated her whole life to raising me and my siblings and supporting my dad's career. Now, in her late 40s, she suddenly found herself single and unsure of what to do next. That's when she met Chris. She told us she bumped into him at the grocery store and they started chatting. Chris was recently released from prison after serving 3 years for drug charges. My siblings and I were immediately skeptical of him, but our mom insisted he had changed and just needed a second chance. She said his rough exterior hid a sensitive soul. Against our advice, they started dating. Chris began coming over to our house frequently. He made an effort to get to know me and my siblings, but there was something about him we just couldn't trust. His clothes reeked of cigarette smoke and his knuckles were scarred from fights. When he talked about his time in prison, he described it like a badge of honor. Still, he made our mom happy. She smiled and laughed more than we had seen since the divorce. Chris treated her well and gained her trust. Soon he was staying over most nights. That's when things started to get concerning. One night, I was woken up by angry yelling coming from downstairs. I crept to the top of the stairs and saw my mom and Chris arguing fiercely. He was demanding she lend him a large sum of money for what he called business expenses. Their voices grew louder until my mom shouted, "I am not bailing you out of jail again," before storming off to her room in tears. The next morning, Chris acted like nothing had happened. He cheerfully made everyone pancakes while whistling a tune. When I asked my mom about the fight, she just shook her head and said, "It's complicated." Over the next few weeks, the late-night arguments became more frequent. Chris would disappear for days on end and not answer his phone. My mom would stay up pacing the floors, sick with worry. When he reappeared, they would have explosive fights about where he had been. Something illegal was going on, but every time we pleaded with my mom to leave him, she refused. The truth finally came out late one night when the cops showed up at our door looking for Chris. He wasn't home, so they politely asked my mom some questions about his activities and connections. Turns out Chris was part of an interstate car theft ring responsible for dozens of luxury SUV thefts over state lines. Chris had two choices: turn state's evidence against the leaders of the ring for a lighter sentence or face up to 20 years in prison. He tried convincing my mom to say she knew nothing, but she had reached her breaking point. The next day, Chris took the deal and was taken into protective custody until the arrests and trial were completed. We hoped that would be the last we saw of Chris, but 6 months later he returned, released for his cooperation. My mom let him move back in, believing he was a changed man. But it only took 2 weeks for the fights to resume. With his former contacts imprisoned, Chris turned to drinking to fill his time. Soon he was stumbling home wasted almost every night. The final straw came when my sister found a positive pregnancy test in the bathroom trash can. When confronted, Chris admitted he had a girlfriend on the side named Darla, who was now pregnant with his child. My mom was heartbroken and finally realized Chris was a lost cause. We helped my mom forcibly remove Chris from our house and even arranged for him to be fired from his job at a mechanic's garage. Unfortunately, Chris had found time between all his alcohol binges to convince my mom to add him to the deed on the house. It took months and a court battle before we got his name legally removed from the property rights. In the meantime, Chris continued to cause trouble around town. He got picked up driving without a license multiple times. When police searched his apartment, they found an illegal firearm and unregistered ammunition. It was enough for him to get thrown back in jail for a probation violation. Once behind bars, Chris tried desperately to get back in touch with my mom and siblings, sending manipulative letters about how much he missed us. He even had the audacity to demand we help pay for a lawyer to get the new charges dropped. We simply wrote, "Return to sender," on the unopened envelopes. Darla gave birth to a baby boy around the same time Chris got sentenced to 3 more years in prison. She quickly realized raising a child alone would be too much. So she cut off contact with Chris and moved to be closer to her family in Kansas. For my mom, it took many months of therapy and self-care before she regained her self-confidence after the ordeal with Chris. The experience made her much more cautious when it came to meeting men. She did eventually start dating a kind single dad we met through family friends. He treats her with the love and respect she deserves. Meanwhile, Chris keeps getting denied parole and release due to his consistent belligerent behavior in prison. I don't feel bad, though. He brought all the consequences on himself with his lies, cheating, and poor choices. We are just happy to finally move on with our lives, free from his toxicity and criminal behavior. Our family came together stronger than ever after surviving that turbulent period. It taught us to value each other and never take our relationships for granted. The next one is a petty revenge story. I made friends with the girl, we were both in our late 20s, who lived in the apartment above me. We'll call her Stacy. Stacy and I instantly clicked, became best friends over the year and 1-2. Most nights she was hanging out with me at my place, eating dinner together and just being great girlfriends. I was super excited about our friendship. I was such a loner in high school and very introverted afterwards. I never really had a super close friend. During our friendship, I started dating someone. We all became pretty good friends, including with a few of his friends. After about 6 months, me and the guy broke up. I was heartbroken. Over several months, Stacy was such an attentive friend. She would call or pop over to check on me daily. She'd bring ice cream or cocktails and just be there for me. I was so thankful to have her as my friend. A few months after the breakup, me and the guy kinda started communicating again. Not a lot, but enough to give me hope. Whenever he called, I instantly would tell her, so giddy about it. Then he'd disappear for a bit, a lot of back and forth like that. One day, all my friends, including her, was busy. When I pushed, another mutual friend of ours admitted they all made plans for Sunday Fun Day, but I was purposely excluded BC my ex was going to be there. Since it was his friends that planned it, I tried my best to understand, but was hurt Stacy didn't tell me or would agree to go without me. The next day I chatted with the mutual friend, opening up at how my feelings were hurt that I was excluded. She eventually broke down and told me that Stacy and my ex were seeing each other. It was her idea to do a group outing without me. I can't describe the amount of sadness I felt. Turns out, whenever I was crying on her shoulder, she would use whatever I would tell her about my ex to manipulate him. That's why whenever we had a good talk, I didn't hear from him again. She totally cock-blocked us from reconciling, which in hindsight was a gift. Now to the petty revenge part. Stacy didn't have a washer and dryer in her apartment. She had to use the community laundry room that was in the same hall as my apartment. One day when I was walking my dog, I saw her leaving the laundry room and head upstairs back to her place. I checked the laundry room, noticed there were 2 dryers going that just started. I ran into my place and grabbed the brightest red lipstick I could find and several black eyeliner pencils. The 2 loads were whites and lights. I threw the red lipstick into one, the black eyeliner into the other. It felt so good when I left that laundry room. After that, I noticed she would stay in the laundry room and read a book the whole time whenever she did her laundry. It always gave me a smile. The next one is a malicious compliance story. I was living in an apartment with a small lot, and during the winter, if there was a storm, we were supposed to move our car to the street for the plow. Usually we would get an email and or text with the time to be out by. Usually. So one night overnight we get about 1.5 inches of snow. This is a place that gets a decent amount of snow, so no big deal. I wake up at a normal time. No text or anything. It's going to be like 40 degrees and sunny, so it's going to melt anyway. I figure I don't need to bother moving the car, so I sit down to play some video games before I go to work. Around 10 a.m. or so, I hear the plow outside and say, okay, get my boots and coat on and get ready to go. I get outside, plow is gone, and people are starting to move back into the lot. So rather than move my car for the sake of moving it, I clear off the snow, grab my shovel, and clean out around the car where it got plowed in. Honestly, our plow drivers suck, so it was the cleanest spot in the lot. Go back inside for an hour or so, walk outside to go to work, and car is gone. What's that about? I didn't get any call or notification or anything. Nobody knocked on my door. I'm 99.9% sure it got towed, but I'm fuming. So I called the police non-emergency line to report it stolen. Police, super helpful. I explained the situation and that it's probably towed, but I'm confused as to why it was towed. They say it's a civil matter, so they aren't going to charge anyone with theft, but they are at least able to locate where the car is. Tow shop across town, $15 cab fee, whoopee. Call the shop to confirm my car is there and see what the damage is, $180 cash only. This is like 2019 in the United States, so cash only kinda weird, but I was working at a winery making tips, so I had a lot of cash saved for a rainy day, luckily. A quirk of that is that being a small place, oftentimes the tips are in small bills, and we usually don't have enough big bills to exchange them. So on a day I make $100 plus in tips, I leave with a lot of ones and fives. First, I tackle my change jar and count out $18 of loose change. Then I get the rest of the cash, as many ones as I can, then 2 fives gets me to $180 even. Perfect. Honestly, this was only half malicious, and half wanting to take the opportunity to unload the absurd amount of cash I had laying around, but off I go. Get to the shop, ask if there's anything they can do because I really don't think they had a real reason to tow me. Nope, nothing we can do, just following orders, the person behind the counter says with a very smug grin. Her grin turned to horror when I pulled out the change bag. I spend the next 15 minutes watching her meticulously count out pennies, nickels, dimes, quarters, ones, fives, $180 even. I'm $10 short. I misheard her on the phone. It was $190. I pull a $20 out of my wallet and ask for the 2 fives back. Oh man, she was pissed. Was this petty? And did the tow truck desk lady do nothing wrong? Absolutely. But if you're going to tow people's cars and make them pay nearly $200 in cash, don't be surprised when they bring cash. The next one is an entitled people story. After apartment searching for several months, I finally found a place that looked reasonable. Currently, I have been living with my elderly dad, caretaking for him, as he has some mobility issues and health issues. I have been doing so for the last year. Prior to that, I was living in an apartment and basically put my life on hold to help him. My mom passed away several years ago, unexpectedly, and since then I've tried to help my dad, even though at times he can have some narcissism which has added to difficulty of me caretaking and living with him. Not all the time, but sometimes. I had been apartment searching for months and had very little luck. It seems like everything was either extremely expensive in my area or far distance-wise or didn't look great. Or on the flip side, no one got back to me with my original inquiry. Finally, I found a place that was only 20 minutes away from my dad in a town that I do like, right on the beach for a reasonable price. It was a studio apartment, so relatively small in size, but seemed doable. When I went to go see it the first time, the current tenant was the one to show it to me. She seemed really nice and said it's a good apartment and that she's going to be living with her mom for the time being, and then in the summer moving to Arizona. When we were walking out, I saw that there were papers on the neighbor's door, and she mentioned they are being evicted. I didn't really feel comfortable asking follow-up questions or prying, which in retrospect I should have. I decide that I want to take the apartment. I speak to the landlord who lives in a different state via phone call. She tells me about the paperwork application I will need to fill out, and that everything looks good. Her sister works in the office downstairs and handles a lot of the paperwork, so I met her as well. I had asked her for a copy of the lease just so I could look it over prior to putting down a deposit. I do so, and I noticed one of the things on the deposit was very unusual. It mentioned repairs in the building, but that the tenant would be responsible for $50 of the repair, even if it were part of the building and not something they caused. I was very confused by the wording and asked her to elaborate on that, and she did so. I then told her I'm very interested and would like to take a final walkthrough and bring my non-refundable holding deposit at that point if everything seemingly looks good, which I did so at that point. Everything about the apartment looked good and reasonable. I put down the holding deposit, which is the amount of rent, and she gives me a copy of the lease that I then have to get notarized, which I found to be unusual. Also, I found it unusual that the holding deposit and the security deposit she wanted in cash only. She said rent going forward could be in check, but that she wanted those in cash. Fast forward, I go back today and bring the lease signed and notarized, and the security deposit in cash. I meet with the sister of the landlord in the office, and after she signs the documents and takes the money from me, we start having a conversation, and she's telling me about the area and the building in general. She then gets onto the layout of the neighbors and who is who. I tell her that it's okay if she doesn't feel comfortable sharing, but I'm just curious about the person being evicted. She then goes on a 20-minute conversation about how that woman has been a complete nightmare, how she was diagnosed with Huntington's disease, And apparently that's why the current tenant is moving out and other tenants have had a huge noise issue with her. She blasts music constantly. She's rude when they ask her to turn it down. She vacuums for 3 hours, banging her vacuum into the wall when people have work meetings when they work from home. After hearing this, I was extremely concerned. I tell her thank you for her time and I go out to my car and call my dad. I burst into tears because I felt so uncomfortable with finding out this information after signing the lease and putting down the money. He tells me I should go back in and tell her that why wasn't this disclosed to me prior to signing anything? I go back in and say that to the sister, and she says to me in response that the current tenant did tell me. I tell her that I knew of the person being evicted, but I had no clue as to why, and I'm very uncomfortable with this information. She then calls her sister, the landlord, and puts me on the phone with her. The landlord basically verbally attacks me, turning things around on me, saying that I have been wishy-washy the entire time, that I'm going to regret this, that it's a cute apartment and by the ocean, that she has never in her 52 years of doing this had someone be so wishy-washy. I felt very uncomfortable because I have a passive personality which she probably knew she could take advantage of, and I asked her how have I been wishy-washy. She said because I wanted clarification of the lease and to see the apartment a second time, I felt incredibly uncomfortable in this scenario. She was still trying to push me to keep and take the apartment at that point, even though I tried to explain to her that I have had a really bad neighbor scenario before and it was an absolute nightmare for me living in that. She tried to tell me that this would not be an issue, in that they were already evicting the person and the person might even be out by the time I move in next month. I told her that I knew sometimes evictions could take months or even up to a year, and I can't be in that kind of scenario. Long story short, I pretty much burst into tears after getting off the phone with her even though I was still in front of the sister. I left, told my dad what happened, and he told me to give him her number so he could give her a call and speak about the deposit and getting it back. He did so. She lied, saying that I knew about this when I first saw the apartment, which is obviously untrue. It sounds like if she is going to be able to have a backup tenant and rent it right away, that she will get the money back. Otherwise, it might be an issue. I'm extremely on edge and uncomfortable about this entire thing. I've never been spoken to like that in my life, and I'm also extremely disappointed about not getting this apartment after searching for months. I felt like going into it, though, might be the wrong decision if I pretty much have confirmation this neighbor has been a living nightmare for the people living there. On the one hand, I understand why obviously the current tenant trying to break her lease because of this wouldn't want to tell me the details of why the eviction is happening. It's just very upsetting that I was about to move into a scenario that seems like it was a very difficult living situation for reasons outside of the apartment. Thank you for watching. I would really appreciate it if you could like the video and subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. We'll see you again tomorrow.